All right, so let's have a little fun and actually create our first top network. This will basically introduce you to the world of tops and the different ways that we can utilize PDG inside of tops networks. Top networks are the networks that enable PDG, the procedural dynamic graphs, to work. All right, and that's the technology. The top network is kind of the way that we wire it all up. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to roll through the different areas in which we can utilize top networks. So let's jump over into Houdini and take a look. Okay, so let's start with basically the two main areas where we can utilize top networks. Okay, so currently I'm in the OBJ context, or the SOP world, if you will. What we can do right off the bat is we can actually just hit the tab key on the keyboard to bring up the tab menu, and we can start typing out top. And what we do is we get a top network. All right, so the top network basically is your object level version of tops. Okay, and this is where we go and we start adding different types of top network nodes. These are very specific to tops themselves. Okay, and they work quite a bit differently than other nodes inside of Houdini, especially in the SOP context. Okay, so I'm going to hit U on the keyboard to jump out of that. Okay, so this is one area or one way we can utilize tops. But we can also drop down a geometry node here, and we can jump inside and we can drop down a top network inside of here as well. All right, but you'll notice that it looks a little bit different. Okay, let me just show you that one more time. So this is a top network, and this is a SOP level top network. On the inside, it looks relatively similar, except we get a geometry import node that allows us to bring in geometry that's being passed into this particular top network, and we can then process it through, and then we can take the result of that and do whatever we want afterwards. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to focus on just one area because I want to try to solidify how to work with tops in general. Okay, I don't want to confuse it by adding in extra layers of context here. Okay, so we're going to utilize the object level top network and just start to get comfortable with how tops works. All right, so what I'm going to do is, let's delete that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump inside of my top network here so by double clicking it. And what we get right off the bat is this local scheduler. Now this local scheduler is what is responsible for maintaining all the events. It's kind of like an event manager. Okay, so we're going to have a lot of top nodes inside of our top network here. And what we need to do is we need to wait for certain nodes to cook, because we're waiting for the result data to come from certain nodes, and we want to be able to chain together all these nodes and pass the data down. And so this local scheduler basically is responsible for managing when certain nodes are done and then passing the data down to the next node. Okay, so that's kind of a high level view of it. One of the interesting things about this particular node, and it's required, let me just put it that way. One of the interesting things about this is we can actually set up a specific working directory. Currently it's set to our HIP file, all right, which means it's just going to go into our project, and it's going to basically put all the output data into that particular directory. So in this case, it's going to put it into wherever my HIP file exists, okay? But what we can do is we can actually set up a bit more of a slick workflow, especially when we're working with Unity. We're going to create some environment variables that allows us to basically have the Houdini version of tops look at the same folder that the Unity version of tops is looking at. Okay, so we'll get into that here in just a little bit. But the next thing I want to do is just kind of work with one of the nodes. And what I'm going to do is drop down a wedge node. Now the wedge node is really cool because what it allows us to do is it allows us to create attributes on particular what they call work items. Okay, and these wedge attributes can do a lot of things. We can write out strings. We can create random variations of things. It really does kind of kick off a process. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to just show you how we can actually create a couple of work items, because this is a very important concept to get used to when you start working with tops. So let's take a look at this wedge node. So what we have here is this thing called work item generation. So we have automatic, dynamic, and static. What we're going to do is focus on using the automatic version for right now, because I want to be able to constantly update these particular values, and then it'll then create new work items for it. Okay, so let's say I want to create a new work item. We'll just leave this at 1 for right now. So for every work item that we create, we'll cover that here in just a second, I want to create a new wedge attribute. Okay, so we're going to go and add a new attribute by hitting this little plus symbol right there. Okay, and I'm going to give this attribute a name. Okay, so this particular name is going to be something like, let's say scale, like so, okay? So right when I put in the attribute name, you can see that we get these different parameters available to us. So now we can basically set a start and end value for our particular scale value, okay? And we could also set it to generate random values between that, okay? So let's go and actually take a look at utilizing this. Let's see what this actually did. So to see the results of this wedge node, what we can do is we can right click on this wedge node and we could say dirty and cook selected node. At least this is the one I like to use all the time. You can also say cook selected node. So if we cook it, all right, what we can do is we get this little work item or this little dot, all right? This is what's referred to as a work item, okay? And this is a very core concept to PDG and top networks. And one thing we can do with this is we can actually inspect it. So we can go in here and double click that particular dot, and you'll see that we get an attribute here called scale, and it's set to 0 currently. All right, so let's do this again. Let's set this to random samples, and then let's go and say dirty and cook selected node. And you can see we get that same single work item. So I'm going to double click the little dot. But this time, because I set that to random, I got a random value between 0 and 1. All right, let's say I make this from 0 to 10 now. All right, and I right click on this node and say dirty and cook selected. Then double click the work item. Now I have a scale value of 4.7. Super cool. So what does this mean? Now we can actually create a bunch of different versions of this. We can create a bunch of different work items. And to do that, we increase the wedge count. So how many variations do we want? All right, so in this case, let's say I want 5. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this node again and say dirty and cook. And look at that. We get 5 work items now. Okay, so for each one of these, we're getting a different value. Pretty cool. So I'm just double clicking on those work items and you can see the new attribute. Now, let's say we created another attribute. Let's go and create something that's called, I don't know, color, like so. And we'll set this to a float vector, okay? And again, I'll set this to random samples, okay? And then we'll say our start and end is 0 to 1 because we don't obviously want to go beyond 0 or 1 there, okay? So let's do that. So let's dirty and cook this now. Let's do dirty and cook. And let's double click on one of those work items. And there we go. Look at that. We have a random color and we have a random scale. Very cool. All right, so that is literally just the beginning of utilizing top. So I'm going to get rid of this color attribute there for now. Let's talk about different ways we can view all this data as well, okay, before we close out this particular lecture. So one thing that's new to Houdini, and it's specifically for tops, is we have the task view. So I'm going to go and hit one of the little plus buttons here. So let's actually do it up here so we can see it a little bit better. All right, let me actually shut this down there, and we will do a new pane type, and I'm going to call this, or I'm going to look for the task graph table. All right, and look at that. We now have our view of our wedge node, all the work items that we generated. All right, so we have an index of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see as I click them too, the dots are highlighting. All right, this gives you just another way to visualize what's happening with tops as we start to create work items and cook these nodes. All right, we also get the state of the node. So in this case, we're successful all the way around. We were able to create 5 work items. They all cooked appropriately. And the cook time, since these are basic random values, was negligible. All right, so but you can get the cook time here. All right, and this is the name of the current wedge work item. All right, and this is the node that it comes from. Okay, so that is really, really quick kind of intro or quick start to top networks and just top nodes and where we can do it. What I want to do now is I want to talk about another key top node called the HDA processor, and this is going to be used throughout our course, and it's kind of one of the core nodes that we use when especially working with creating levels for the Houdini engine in Unity. Okay, thanks so much.